You ever come home and realize someone else thinks they own your life? Because that's exactly what it felt like the moment I smelled chlorine before I even stepped inside my house. That sharp, chemical bite hit the back of my throat, and I already knew she was in my pool again. I didn't rush, didn't slam the door. I just pulled out my phone, opened the camera feed, and there it was, Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, stretched out on a floating lounger like she paid the mortgage, surrounded by half a dozen people I'd never seen before. Laughter echoed through my backyard speakers like it belonged there. Beer bottles lined the edge of my deck. Towels draped over the chairs I bought with my own money. My private pool turned into her weekend resort. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm a 36-year-old HVAC engineer, and every pipe, every valve, every inch of that pool system behind my house, I built it myself. Nights, weekends, 110-degree Texas heat. I didn't just pay for that pool, I engineered it. It's not just water back there. It's pressure systems, chemical balance, flow control, everything tuned exactly how I want it. Or at least how I used to. The first time Brenda showed up, I thought it was a mistake. Second time, I knocked on her door. Third time, I changed the locks. That lasted exactly 48 hours before I came home to find the latch snapped clean and a brand new one installed. Hers. That's when I called the HOA. You'd think reporting someone for breaking into your property would get a reaction, right? Instead, I got a letter, a warning, about being uncooperative with community engagement. I stood there in my kitchen reading that paper while her music thumped through my walls, bass vibrating through the floor like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. That's when something shifted, because I realized Brenda didn't think she was doing anything wrong. In her mind, my pool wasn't private. It was underutilized community space. Her words, not mine. And arguing with someone like that? Pointless. You don't win by shouting louder. You win by letting them keep going just long enough. So I stopped calling, stopped confronting. I even stopped locking the gate. From the outside, it probably looked like I gave up. Like I finally accepted that my backyard wasn't mine anymore. But what Brenda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every system they were splashing around in, every sensor, every valve, every silent little piece of engineering buried beneath that water was still listening. And I was about to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. A public pool. Regulated, documented, and impossible to walk away from clean. I started paying attention to the details most people would never notice. The quiet hum beneath the water when the filtration system cycles. The subtle vibration in the deck when pressure levels shift. The faint chemical tang that tells you everything is balanced down to the decimal. Because that is what I do. I read systems, I build them, and more importantly, I know exactly how they behave when someone starts treating them like they are public property instead of precision equipment. And Brenda, she had no idea she was stepping into something she could not control. Every weekend like clockwork she showed up with more people, louder music, bigger coolers, the sound of glass bottles clinking against the tile like it was some kind of rooftop bar instead of my backyard. And I would sit inside, sometimes right on the other side of the glass door, watching through the reflection so they would not even realize I was there, memorizing patterns, who came, how long they stayed, when they got comfortable enough to stop looking over their shoulders. Because that is the moment people make mistakes, the moment they believe there are no consequences. And that is exactly what I needed. I even overheard her one afternoon, her voice carrying over the water, sharp and confident, telling someone this pool was basically part of the community now, that I was not using it properly anyway. Like somehow 10 years of work could be dismissed with one sentence and a plastic cup in her hand. And that was when I stopped feeling angry and started feeling focused. Because anger is loud, anger makes you react. But focus, that is quiet, that is patient, that is where real control lies. So I went out to the equipment pad the next morning, early, before the sun had even burned the dew off the grass, and I opened the panel. The familiar click of the latch sounded different this time, heavier, like I was locking in a decision instead of just checking maintenance. And I began recalibrating, not to break anything, not to harm anyone, just to make the system behave exactly the way it was designed to behave under strict compliance. The kind of compliance you see in public facilities, monitored, documented, regulated down to. The second, I adjusted the chemical alert thresholds, not unsafe, just sensitive. I enabled full logging on every sensor, flow rate, entry points, pressure fluctuations, timestamps down to the millisecond, I rerouted the camera feeds to a secure backup, and then I added one more thing. Something simple, something legal, something undeniable: automated incident reporting, tied directly to the conditions that would only trigger if the system detected unauthorized usage patterns. And the beauty of it was I did not have to accuse anyone. I did not have to argue. I just had to let the system do what it was built to do. Because if Brenda wanted a public pool, then she was about to get every rule that came with one, every regulation, every record, every consequence. And as I closed that panel and heard the soft hum of everything coming online, I realized something that almost made me smile. I was not setting a trap. I was just removing the illusion that there were no rules. And the next time she stepped into that water, it was not going to feel like freedom anymore. Saturday came in heavy with heat, the kind that makes the air feel thick before noon. And right on schedule I heard it, the metal latch at my side gate clicking open like it belonged to someone else, followed by the familiar echo of voices spilling into my backyard, louder this time, more confident, like they had done it enough times to forget there was ever a line they were crossing. I stayed inside, standing just out of sight, watching the reflection in the glass as Brenda walked in first, sunglasses, wide brim hat, carrying herself like she was hosting something she owned, her friends trailing behind with bags, towels, coolers, the smell of sunscreen mixing with chlorine as they dropped everything onto my deck without hesitation. One of them even adjusted the umbrella I installed last summer, like she was fixing something in her own home. And that was the moment I knew the illusion was complete. They were not sneaking in anymore. They were arriving. And that changes everything. Because when people stop hiding, they stop being careful. I glanced down at my phone, the system dashboard already alive with activity, each entry point registering movement, timestamps stacking in real time, pressure sensors detecting the shift as the first person stepped into the water, a soft ripple turning into waves, the pump adjusting automatically, logging every fluctuation, every imbalance, not as a warning, but as a record, clean, precise, undeniable. I could hear them laughing now. Louder, someone turned the music up, bass rolling across the surface of the pool, distorting the reflections into broken pieces of light. And then it happened. Exactly like I expected. More people showed up, more weight, more movement, more strain on a system designed for controlled use, not an unregulated crowd treating it like a public resort. I watched the numbers change on my screen, chemical levels shifting just enough to trigger the first stage. Not dangerous, not even noticeable to them. But the system noticed, and that was all that mattered. A quiet alert flashed across my display, internal log initiated. Unauthorized usage pattern detected, and I felt that same calm settle in. Not satisfaction, not yet, just confirmation that everything was working exactly as intended. Outside, Brenda raised her glass, saying something I could not fully hear over the music, but I caught enough. Something about finally having a place everyone could enjoy, and I almost laughed, because she was right. In a way, she had turned it into something public, and public spaces come with rules. Rules she had never bothered to learn, rules that do not care about confidence or authority or who you think you are in a neighborhood. I tapped the next setting, enabling full compliance mode. The system adjusted instantly, flow rates recalibrated, monitoring thresholds tightened, every second now accounted for, every action recorded. And still, they had no idea. They kept swimming, kept laughing, completely unaware that the pool beneath them was no longer just water. It was evidence, building piece by piece, moment by moment. And as I stood there listening to the sound of water splashing against tile that I paid for, watching strangers treat it like it was theirs, I realized something that made the corners of my mouth tighten just slightly. This was the last time it would ever happen like this, because the next step was not about watching anymore. The next step was about letting the system speak for me. And systems like mine do not get ignored. I did not step outside right away because timing matters more than confrontation, and I needed them comfortable, fully settled into the lie they had been telling themselves. The music had shifted into something louder, the kind of bass that rattles glass and makes people forget where they are, and the water was no longer calm. It churned under the weight of too many bodies moving without rhythm, splashes hitting the tile in uneven bursts, each impact sending small vibrations through the system that I could feel even from inside, like a pulse that did not belong to me. I watched the dashboard as the second stage flagged, not an alarm yet, just escalation. Internal thresholds tightening further. Chemical balance adjusting automatically to compensate for load. The system doing exactly what it was designed to do when pushed beyond normal residential use. Documenting, correcting, logging everything down to the second. And still they laughed. Still they moved like nothing could touch them. Brenda standing near the edge now, talking with her hands, pointing around like she was giving a tour, like she was explaining features she had nothing to do with building. And that was when I opened the door, slowly, letting the sound of it cut through the music just enough to make a few heads turn, not all of them, just enough, a ripple of attention that moved across the pool like a shadow. Conversations dipped for half a second before picking back up, because in their minds I was not the owner anymore. I was just the guy who lived here, an inconvenience at best. Brenda looked at me over her sunglasses, that same controlled smile, the one that pretends everything is normal even when it is not, and she raised her voice just slightly, telling me they were almost done, like she was doing me a favor, like this was temporary, and I nodded, not agreeing, not arguing, just acknowledging, because the argument had already been decided, just not out loud yet. I stepped back inside without another word, closed the door, and the sound of the party swallowed the moment completely, and that was when I initiated the next phase. Not with a dramatic gesture, not with anything they could see, just a single input on my phone, enabling compliance alerting, and within seconds the system responded, a subtle shift first. The circulation pattern changed, flow redirecting through the secondary loop, increasing sensitivity across every monitored parameter, and then the first external signal triggered, not loud, not chaotic, just a clean, unmistakable tone that cut through the music like a line being drawn, a safety alert, the kind required in any regulated public pool environment when thresholds are exceeded, the kind that demands attention. And just like that, the energy outside changed. Laughter broke. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People looked around. Confusion replacing confidence in seconds. Someone asked what that sound was. Another voice suggested it was nothing. But the system did not stop. It repeated the alert, consistent, precise, impossible to ignore, and I watched as Brenda's posture shifted, just slightly. The first crack in that certainty she carried, because for the first time since she stepped into my backyard, something was happening that she did not control, and the water around them, still safe, still clear, suddenly felt different, not because it changed, but because the illusion did. The tone kept repeating, steady, mechanical, cutting through the heat and noise like something official had just entered the room. And that was the moment everything began to shift. Not all at once, but enough to break the illusion they had been holding on to. One by one, people started climbing out of the water, dripping across my deck, looking around like they were waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Phones coming out, voices lowering, confusion spreading faster than the music could cover it. And Brenda, she did not move at first. She stood there in the shallow end, trying to smile through it, waving her hand like it was just some kind of glitch, telling everyone it was probably a system error, that it happens sometimes. But her voice did not carry the same certainty anymore. It was thinner now, stretched, and I could see it even from inside. The way her shoulders tightened just slightly. The way she kept glancing toward the house like she expected me to come out and shut it off for her. Like I always had control over something she never bothered to understand. The alert shifted to the next phase exactly on schedule. A recorded message layered over the tone. Calm, neutral, unmistakably official, notifying that the pool system had entered compliance monitoring due to detected usage exceeding private residential thresholds. And just like that, the language changed the room, because people understand authority when they hear it, even if they do not know where it is coming from. Someone asked what that meant. Another person laughed nervously, but no one got back in the water. The surface of the pool began to settle, ripples fading into stillness, and the silence between the alerts started to feel heavier than the sound itself. I watched the logs continue to build on my screen. Every entry, every second, every fluctuation captured and stored, time-stamped, categorized, structured in a way that could not be argued with later, because that is the thing about systems. They do not forget, they do not exaggerate, they just record. And outside, the party was unraveling without anyone needing to say it out loud. Towels were being gathered now. Conversations turning into quiet exchanges, people asking each other if they should leave, if this was going to be a problem, and Brenda finally stepped out of the pool, water dripping from the edge of her hat, her movements slower now, more calculated, like she was trying to regain control of something that had already moved past her. She walked toward the edge of the patio, looking at the speakers, at the lights, at anything she could pretend was causing it. But none of it responded to her. None of it changed, because none of it belonged to her. And that realization, that quiet, creeping understanding, was finally starting to land. She looked toward the house again, longer this time, and I did not move. I stayed exactly where I was, watching. Through the reflection, letting the system speak in my place, letting the structure I built carry the weight of what I did not have to say. Because this was never about confrontation, it was about control. And for the first time since she stepped into my backyard weeks ago, Brenda was standing in a space where she did not have any. And the longer the alerts continued, the clearer that became. Until even the people around her started stepping back, not because they were told to, but because something about the situation no longer felt casual, no longer felt safe in the way they had convinced themselves it was. And that was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the panic, not the noise, just this quiet collapse, where no one knew what to do next, and the system kept recording every second of it. Brenda finally did what she had not done once since this started. She walked toward my door, not fast, not angry, just controlled, like she was still trying to hold on to whatever authority she thought she had left. The sharp tap of her knuckles against the glass cut through the muffled alert tone inside, and for a second everything felt still, like the moment right before something shifts permanently. I let it sit there, 1 beat, 2 beats, before I opened the door just enough to hear her clearly. The heat from outside rolled in with the smell of chlorine and sunscreen, thick and heavy, clinging to the air between us. She forced a smile, but it did not reach her eyes this time. And she asked me, calm but tight, if I could turn that off, said it was scaring people, said it was ruining the atmosphere. Like that was still the conversation we were having. Like this was about comfort instead of consequence. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my voice even, and told her I could not override a compliance alert once it was triggered, that the system was designed to log and report until conditions returned to normal. And I watched the words land, slowly, not fully understood yet, but enough to unsettle her. She asked what conditions, and I told her exactly what the system had already determined. Unauthorized use, exceeding residential capacity, unregistered access, all the things she had been ignoring because no one had ever made them real before. Behind her, I could see people gathering their things faster now, the energy shifting from confusion to urgency, doors opening, footsteps moving toward the gate, the soft scrape of chairs being dragged back into place like they were trying to undo something that had already been recorded. And Brenda stepped closer, lowering her voice, asking me to just shut it down, just this once, promising it would not happen again. And that was the moment I knew the illusion had finally broken, because she was no longer speaking as the person in charge. She was asking, and I shook my head, not out of anger, not out of spite, just certainty, and told her it was already past that point. The logs were active. The system had flagged the event, and anything that followed would be documented as part of the same incident. I watched her glance back at the pool, at the water now completely still, untouched, reflecting a sky that suddenly felt a lot quieter than it had an hour ago. And then her phone buzzed in her hand, a sharp vibration that made her look down, her expression shifting again as she read whatever came through. Probably the same automated notification that had been triggered on my end, the kind that does not accuse, does not argue, just states facts in plain language. And she looked back at me, this time without the smile, without the tone, just a brief pause like she was trying to find something to say that would put things back where they were before. But there was nothing left to reach for, because the system had already done what I needed it to do. It had turned assumptions into records, habits into violations, and confidence into something a lot more fragile. And as the last of her guests slipped out through the gate, quiet now, heads down, avoiding eye contact like they had just realized they were somewhere they were not supposed to be, Brenda stood there for one more second, the weight of it finally settling in, and I closed the door gently, not to shut her out, but because the conversation was already over. And outside, for the first time in weeks, there was no music, no laughter, just the soft hum of a system doing exactly what it was built to do. The house felt different the second the door closed, quieter in a way that was not just about the absence of noise, but about something shifting back into place, like pressure finally releasing from a system that had been pushed too far. And I stood there for a moment listening to the hum of the equipment outside, steady, controlled, unchanged, because unlike people, systems do not panic when things go wrong. They adjust, they respond, they keep recording. And I walked over to the counter, set my phone down, and watched the logs continue to update in real time. Every exit point marked, every sensor returning to baseline as the water settled into stillness. And that was when the final phase began, not with a sound this time, not with anything dramatic, just a series of automated reports compiling themselves in the background, structured, formatted, ready. The kind of documentation that does not rely on memory or opinion, just data, clean and precise. And I knew exactly where those reports were going, because I had set that part up days ago. Local compliance notification, HOA board copy, and one more channel Brenda had never considered, the county environmental office, not because anything unsafe had happened, but because any system flagged under public use conditions gets reviewed. That is how regulation works. You do not wait for damage. You verify process, and outside, I could hear the faint sound of a car door closing. Then another, engine starting, the last of the guests leaving without a word. No laughter now, no music, just quiet retreat, and I stepped back to the window, looking out at the pool, empty, untouched. The surface smooth again like nothing had happened, except everything had, because this time it was not just a moment, it was a record, a full sequence of events that could not be dismissed or rewritten later. And across the yard I saw Brenda still standing near the gate, phone in her hand, reading something again, longer this time, her posture no longer sharp or controlled, just still, like she was trying to process how something that felt so simple had turned into something she could not manage. And that was the part most people never understand. It is not the confrontation that changes things, it is the documentation. It is the moment when actions stop being deniable and start being traceable. And I could almost see it happening in real time. The shift from confidence to calculation, from assumption to consequence. Because now she had something in her hand that did not come from me, did not come from a neighbor or a complaint. It came from a system, neutral, structured, impossible to argue with. And I knew what it said without needing to read it. Unauthorized access, capacity exceedance, compliance flag triggered, review pending, language that does not accuse but does not leave room either. And she finally looked up, not at the pool this time, not at the house, just straight ahead like she was seeing something much bigger than a backyard, something tied to rules she had ignored for too long. And then she walked out, slow, deliberate, closing the gate behind her in a way she never had before, making sure it latched. And I watched until she was gone, until the yard was empty, until the only sound left was the low, steady hum of a system that had done exactly what it was built to do. And for the first time since this started, there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to argue, just a process already in motion, moving forward without me needing to say another word. Monday morning came in quiet, but sharp, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. And I was already awake before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the final reports finish compiling on my screen, timestamps aligned, sensor data cross-referenced, entry logs mapped cleanly against capacity thresholds, everything structured in a way that told a complete story without needing a single opinion attached to it. And that is the part most people underestimate. It is not about proving someone wrong. It is about making it impossible to pretend nothing happened. The system had already sent out the initial notifications the day before, but this was different. This was the full record, the kind that gets reviewed, archived, and acted on. And right on schedule my phone lit up again. Not from Brenda this time, not from a neighbor, but from the HOA board group thread. The tone of the messages already different, no longer casual, no longer defensive. Now it was questions, requests for clarification, references to documentation, and I could almost hear the shift in their voices just from the wording, because now they had something in front of them that did not come from a complaint. It came from a system they could not dismiss as personal. And I let the messages sit for a moment before opening them, reading through the chain slowly, someone asking if this was accurate, someone else mentioning liability concerns, another bringing up compliance obligations that had apparently been ignored until now. And then Brenda finally responded, her message shorter than usual, stripped of the tone she always carried. asking for a private discussion, and that was when I stood up, walked over to the back window, and looked out at the pool again, still untouched, the water flat like glass, reflecting the sky in a way that made it look deeper than it actually was. And for a second it almost felt like none of it had happened. Except I knew better, because systems do not forget, and neither do records. The gate stayed closed that morning, no sound of it opening, no footsteps on the deck, no voices spilling into the yard like they belonged there. Just stillness, and around mid-morning there was a knock at the front door, not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate, and when I opened it, Brenda was standing there without the sunglasses, without the hat, without the crowd behind her, just her, holding her phone like. It carried more weight than before, and she did not start with a smile this time. She started with a question, asking if we could talk about what happened, not as a demand, not as a statement, but as a request, and I stepped aside just enough to let the air shift between us, not inviting, not refusing, just holding the space where the conversation would finally happen on equal ground. Because that is what changes when documentation enters the picture. It levels everything. It removes the performance, the assumptions, the noise, and replaces it with something simple, something clear, something neither side can ignore. And as she stood there waiting, I realized this was the part that actually mattered, not the alerts, not the system, not even the reports, but the moment after, when everything has already been recorded and the only thing left is how you respond to it. And for the first time since she stepped into my backyard weeks ago, Brenda was not acting like she owned anything. She was standing there like someone who had just realized she never did. She stepped inside slowly, like the air itself had changed rules without telling her. And for a second neither of us spoke, just the quiet hum of the house filling the space between us, steady and controlled, nothing like the noise she had brought with her the day before. And she held her phone out slightly, not showing it to me yet, just holding it like it mattered. And then she said it. Not loud, not defensive, just direct, asking me if I had set all of this up, and I did not rush the answer. I just nodded once, because there was no reason to dress it up, no reason to argue anymore. Everything that mattered was already recorded, and she exhaled, a slow breath that sounded like something finally settling, and she looked down at her screen again, scrolling through whatever had come in, the notifications, the report summaries, the language that does not bend for anyone. And she asked what happens next, not as a challenge, not as a threat, just a question, and I told her the truth, that the system had flagged a compliance event, that the reports had already been sent, that anything after that was process, review, decisions made by people who rely on documentation, not opinions, and she nodded slightly, like she already understood that part, like she had already started thinking about how this would look outside of our conversation, outside of the neighborhood. And for a moment she tried to explain, not excuse, just explain, saying she thought it was harmless, that no one was getting hurt, that it felt like something the community could share. And I listened, not interrupting, because I had already heard versions of that before, just not like this, not without the confidence behind it. And when she finished, I told her something simple, something that did not need to be louder than it was. That private property does not become public just because someone decides it should. And that systems do not care about intentions, they respond to actions. And that was when she finally looked up, fully, meeting my eyes without anything in between. No sunglasses, no tone, just understanding, and she asked if there was anything she could do to fix it. And I thought about that for a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because this was the part where it could go either way, escalation or resolution. And I told her that what mattered now was not undoing what had already happened. That part was already in motion, but making sure it never happened again. Not to me, not to anyone else who might not have had the same systems in place. And she nodded again, slower this time, like the weight of it was landing in a different way, not just inconvenience, but consequence. And she turned to leave, pausing at the door for a brief second before stepping out. And when I closed it behind her, the house settled back into that same quiet. But this time it felt earned, like something had finally been corrected instead of just stopped. And later that afternoon I walked out to the backyard, the sun high, the air still carrying that faint trace of chlorine, and the pool sat there exactly as it should, untouched, controlled, reflecting everything above it without distortion. And I stood there for a moment, listening to the low hum of the system running beneath the surface, doing its job without needing attention, without needing recognition, just steady, precise, inevitable. And I realized something as I watched the water stay perfectly still. Justice is not loud. It does not argue. It does not chase. It just waits, records, and when the time comes, it makes itself undeniable.